Hey, welcome to Devoted once again. Thank you for being devoted to Devoted. Really do appreciate it. Just talking just recently about we don't even know who watches these things, but we're grateful that people do. So, because we hear comments. Sometimes we know the person. We knew they were watching. Then sometimes we'll hear a conversation and have a conversation, hear a comment from someone that you watch Devoted. Yeah, cool. So we're glad you're tuning in. As you know, if you've been watching, and even if you just kind of stumbled upon this, what we're doing is we're just walking through the book of Hebrews. We've been doing this for several months. Hebrews is a big book of lots of big ideas, but great ideas. We don't know who the author is. We've got some ideas, but we are all the way into chapter 11. For those who may not know, chapter 11 is the Hall of Fame of Faith, right? The Hall of Faith, and it's basically every verse almost starts by faith, and we made it all the way to verse 35 when we kind of stopped, because it says in Hebrews 11:35 what we call the first part of verse 35, and by faith some women receive back their dead, or receive back their loved ones from the dead. And so we just stopped and said, I just felt like the Spirit of God said, how about we jump into that stream for just a little bit? And so we've been in that stream for going on probably 2 months now, and we're almost wrapped up. We got about 2 or 3 more, not many more, but we are looking at resuscitations. And we talked about this before, resurrections, resuscitations, very different. Resurrection's only been one, and the one resurrection leads the way to all the other resurrections that will happen. But there's not been a single resurrection happened except for one, and that would be, of course, Jesus. All the others were resuscitations, where people died, brought back to life, and died again. Now, will they come back to life at the great when Jesus returns? Sure, absolutely, the resurrection. But it's different than resuscitation. But still, miraculous in its own right. Just very different in the scope of things. That makes sense? Resurrection is eternal, resuscitation is not, but still, women receive back their dead. And that was pretty cool. So we jump in to this story in Acts, and it's this great story where Peter, it's in Acts 9, where Peter is at the forefront here, and it's pretty cool. So we'll read, there's only one verse on the screen. We're going to center on one verse, but let me start at verse 36, chapter 9, verse 36. Read along, listen along, but the one verse will be on the screen. Here it is. There was a believer in Joppa named Tabitha, which in Greek is Dorcas. That's really important. Dorcas is the Greek translation of Tabitha. She was always doing kind things for others and helping the poor. Always a good thing to do. It can't get you into heaven. It should not be a religion all to itself, helping the poor and being kind. Lots of non-Christians can do that. But there's a difference between being a Christian and doing that and simply doing it because we're nice and kind. All right. About that time, she became ill and died. Her body was washed for burial and laid in an upstairs room, or an upper room, verse 38. But the believers had heard that Jesus was nearby at Lydda. So they sent 2 men to beg him, please come as soon as possible. We'll come back to that in just a few minutes here. So Peter returned with them, and as soon as he arrived, they took him to the upstairs room, the upper room. The room was filled with widows who were weeping and showing him the coats and other clothes that Dorcas had made for them. So we're at this verse in verse 40 in just a second. But before we do, we've talked about this before, if you've been following and trailing and tracking, that in deaths like these in ancient culture, and even still to this day, but certainly in that culture, there were paid mourners. There were people who were paid to come and mourn and grieve. And the more you had, the more important the person was, right? And the longer the wake or the grieving process. And so, but they would pay people. And so if you remember, back even when Jesus raised Jairus' daughter, there's a reason I'm bringing that up. But when Jesus raised Jairus' daughter, he drove all of the professional mourners out, okay? Well, here we have professional mourners as well. And we even see professional mourners all the way back in the Old Testament. But here's a little different in the fact that they were widows who were weeping and showing him the coats and other clothes Dorcas had made for them. So widows are poor. Widows are basically they now have to sustain a beggar's life. And so here's the life and the legacy of Tabitha, or Dorcas, that she was surrounded by people. Were there professional mourners? Absolutely. But I don't think these widows were. I think these widows were simply people who were touched by the legacy of this woman's life. Does it make sense? So we said earlier her kindness and helping others who are poor. Well, look at that. So make sure you leave a trail behind you. Amen? Make sure as you live your life, make sure you leave a trail behind you. And I hope and pray it's selfless, and it is serving others, and it is obviously pointing to Christ. But make sure you are leaving a trail behind you, all right? Make sure it's a good one. So here it is, verse 40. It's on the screen. But Peter asked them all to leave the room. Something, that's another, and we knew that, but we'll come back. Then he knelt and prayed. Turning to the body, he said to the body, "Get up, Tabitha." Now, I'll tell you what else that means. And she opened her eyes. When she saw Peter, she sat up. We'll come back and break that down. But verse 41 and 42, he gave her his hand and helped her up. Then he called in the widows and all the believers, and he presented her to them alive. The news spread through the whole town, and many believed in the Lord. Amen, right? What a great testimony. Go back to verse 40. Who else had a moment where he healed a young girl? Who else asked people to leave the room? And in fact, the only persons with this other person, you're all screaming at the screen like, it's Jesus, it's Jesus. So Jesus had a moment here, right? And who did Jesus bring into the room with him? James, John, and our boy Peter. And so what does Peter do? Peter does the same. Somebody says does the same. Peter mimics. Somebody say mimics. Peter just simply does what he saw Jesus do earlier in his life. He says, he asks him to leave the room. He kneels, he prays, he turns to the body, and he says, "Get up, Tabitha." Now, interesting, this woman's name was Tabitha. Okay? Her Greek translation, so that's the Aramaic name, is Tabitha, the language of the common person, and really Jesus' language, Aramaic. It's translated to Greek, Dorcas. Okay? But Tabitha simply means maiden. So a little bit older than a little girl. You remember what Jesus said to the little girl? Talitha. Talitha kumi. Basically, exactly what Peter said is Tabitha kumi. Just simply using her name, but her name means young maiden. Jesus says Talitha, meaning young girl. Young girl, arise. Young maiden, young lady, arise. Pretty cool. Just her name just happened to be Tabitha, which is very, very similar. I mean, literally, it's just one letter away and a very slight different meaning from Talitha. Talitha, Tabitha, right? And so here we see Peter mimicking Jesus. And I think that's what we need to be devoted to. You remember the craze? Are you old enough to remember the craze right here? The little bracelets, W.W.J.D. I had mine. Boom. I'm not even sure. I don't remember how long ago that was, but I had mine. W.W.J.D. What would Jesus do? What would Jesus do? Learn it. Figure it out. Study it. And then do it. In all matters. What would Jesus do? Be devoted to mimicking Jesus. Amen? Be devoted to doing what Jesus would do. Be blessed.